Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is our ADA Master Class. We'll be discussing ADA compliance for bottle fillers and drinking fountains. Thank you so much for attending, for being here. We greatly appreciate it. Keep in mind as I move through the presentation that the all the requirements that I'm about to cover, we're about to dig into, apply to many types of equipment, right? Not just drinking fountains, but again, that's our focus today. That's the entirety of the webinar focused on ADA compliance for those two specific products, but they apply to so much, and you can easily take a lot of the measurements that we're about to go across and think about fire extinguishers, think about baby changing tables, all of those types of things. Okay. Now, also consider that all of you have your own state and local laws that must also be adhered to. So ensure that those are taken into consideration. State and local standards must be more strict than what's currently in place at the federal level, which is what we're digging in today, the federal standard for compliance. My name is Justin Dunn. I'm the field marketing manager over here at Haws. I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary here, and I've been talking about ADA and ANSI standards and bottle fillers and drinking fountains and eye washes for a good long time now. And I will be your expert as I guide you through the Americans with Disabilities Act. On the back end of the webinar are my two partners in crime helping to keep the webinar running and to keep me on time. They're going to yell at me if I start going too overboard with information. If you'll please say hi real quick.
Hi everyone, I'm Allie McCombs.
And I'm Samantha.
And we will be running the back end of this webinar today and helping with poll questions.
Awesome, thank you very much. And then moving on, just so you're aware, on your control panel, you can pose questions at any time during the presentation. Okay, just use the question section up there. Any questions that can't be addressed during the Q&A, because I'm going to cover as many as I can and try to keep us on time, will be answered either via the email or in the follow-up document that we'll send you. We'll put together an Excel sheet with your questions and my personal answers to those, and we'll try to get those answers. So don't hold on to those, submit them into there, and we'll try to get to them as best we can. And then poll questions. We'll be launching poll questions during the presentation. These are incredibly important to us to continue to make this product something that is relevant to you and to give us, a finger on the pulse of the industry so that we can continue to serve you best. So there will be 5 total, piece of cake, and we'll launch them throughout the presentation. Next, that follow-up email that I just kind of briefly mentioned, it'll be sent out very quickly after the presentation. It's going to include the on-demand recording because we always get asked, the presentation slides, additional support materials, CEU instructions. Okay, for ABIH, AIA, IFMA, and ASPE, we'll do a lot of the reporting. You just have to let us know after the webinar, and we are happy to get you credit. Incredibly important. And then, of course, the Q&A document will be included as well. Now, very quickly, just a bit about us as a company. And after the agenda, a little bit of info on the ADA and its origins. Now, our founder, that modern gentleman on the left there with the sweet mustache, is Luther Haws, and he invented the world's first sanitary drinking fountain bubbler head in 1906 amidst the ban the cup movements, and went on to form the Haws Sanitary Drinking Fountain Company in 1909 in Berkeley, California. Luther was working as a sanitation inspector for Berkeley, California, when he had an epiphany. He wanted to invent a device that would prevent us from spreading germs and disease through public hydration, and that device was the drinking fountain bubbler head. Prior to Mr. Haws and his invention, it was incredibly commonplace to see public fountains with constant running water, which is still common in some areas in the world today. But you'd stop You drink from a cup attached to the fountain via a chain that you would fill from that fountain, which was the preferred method pre 1900s because nobody believed in the silly notion that there were, that we were sharing microscopic germs and viruses via our mouths and saliva, which is gross. Now, this had um, what is today obvious public sanitation issues. Okay, some of the common diseases being spread at the time uh, included everything that wiped out your party in Oregon Trail. It was cholera, typhoid fever, dysentery, all of which potentially fatal too at the time, spreading from mouth to cup to mouth. And lucky for us, Luther put his inventive mind to the task and he found a solution that has continued to benefit public health and safety throughout the world to this day. And a fun fact, the actual first prototype for that is a brass bedpost, which is kind of funny. Dude's disassembling his house for his invention. Haws was also responsible for developing the first electric water coolers back when they were still dropping off daily ice blocks to cool the water inside of the machine. We also had the first line of standardized accessible fountains and pioneered the modern bottle filler category back when nobody cared. We had to fight tooth and nail just to get a bottle filler onto a project, and now you can't throw a rock without hitting a job that has bottle fillers on it. I mean, that's really that's what the people want. You have to have your drinking fountains. It's part of the code, and we'll talk about that. We've had a very long history here with hydration and public sanitation that we are very proud of, and we think makes us uniquely positioned to present this information to you. So right now we are located in Sparks, Nevada. That's our home base, right at the foot of Tahoe, where we work tirelessly to improve health and safety for you guys. Now, we're going to do an overview of the ADA legislation for drinking fountains, common ADA installation issues. I've got some fun pictures to show you. ADA compliant drinking fountains and bottle filler installations, hygienic solutions, and then we'll have that Q&A and some additional information for you at the end of the webinar. Now, we're going to jump into our overview of the ADA legislation, how we got to where we are, why this is important, and then we'll start diving into the nitty-gritty details, measurements, and all that stuff. Okay. Now, before we dive into those measurements, it's important to remember that this is civil rights legislation. Okay. The ADA legislation was the first major legislation to treat disability rights as a civil rights issue. Prior to this standard and its inception, accessibility was up to businesses and was infrequently available. People didn't want to spend the money to update their businesses and thought that your disability was your problem. There were no teeth in any form or requirements to provide access to buildings and grounds for an entire class of people that were being very heavily neglected. But thanks to people like Justin Dart, former head of Dart Industries, a company responsible for such brands as Duracell, Tupperware, I think even eventually merging with Kraft. He was one of the biggest advocates for the movement and is often referred to as the father or grandfather of the ADA. And he himself was disabled. That's in the top right-hand photo, and in the left-hand photo, he's the gentleman nearest to the center there. And alongside fellow advocates and Mr. George H.W. Bush, who was the sitting president at the time that signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law on July 26, 1990, this new act granted reasonable accommodations to people with disabilities and prohibited discrimination based on those disabilities. It's a very cool story if you look up. And it would be hard to believe now, but they were met with strong resistance to these proposed changes. And Dart went on to found the President's Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities to combat pushes to weaken the ADA from advocates that would surprise you and some that wouldn't surprise you, some fairly famous ones, actually. There were protests, counter-protests. They had demonstrations like the Capitol Crawl. That's one of my favorites, where about 60 plus demonstrators abandoned their wheelchairs, walking devices, and they crawled up the steps of the Capitol to show its inaccessibility because there was no accessible way into the Capitol. And once they reached the top, they demanded to speak with the Speaker of the House. That's Jennifer Keelan Chaffin's there on the bottom with this sweet bandana. She's 8 years old, who suffered from cerebral palsy and famously said, "I'll take all night if I have to," which were pretty bold words from an 8-year-old. She still advocates and speaks about her involvement in the movement as a super cool kids book called All the Way to the Top, which is pretty rad. And I think in the greatest twist of in history of all time, and another instance, because Canada was doing the same thing. Most countries have a version of the ADA, the CDA being Canada's disability accessibility standard. And in a great twist, they were, you know, fighting the Public Transit Authority in Canada, and were arrested. But in the best twist, they couldn't arrest them. They couldn't transport the people they'd arrested because they didn't have accessible paddy wagons, and they had to get buses that were accessible, only proving their point. And then kind of the last thing here, this is actually the fresh ink getting thrown on the deal. This is HW signing the bill into law alongside Evan Kemp, chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and Justin Dart, who's the President's Committee chairman. And added a nice little note there for him. All right, and now that we're done with our history lesson, we're going to launch poll question numero uno.
Alrighty, getting into our first poll question today. What are you looking to obtain from this webinar? Option 1, basic ADA compliance guidance. Option 2, product recommendations. Option 3, touchless hygienic solutions. Option 4, CEU credits. I'll give you all a little bit more time to vote on those options. We greatly appreciate your votes on this.
Seems like the overwhelming winner so far is just ADA compliance guidance. A lot of people just interested in making sure that they're fully understanding the ADA and how it works.
Which is wonderful. Thank you everyone for your voting on this. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll.
All right, and then moving on, we're going to get into it. Let's begin. So the Americans with Disabilities Act 28 CFR Part 36 Title 3 regarding public accommodations in commercial facilities and its requirements are enforced by none other than the Department of Justice. Title 3 is going to be our entire focus today. The following are the key sections of the standard pertaining to drinking fountains and their compliance. Also, remember that we are going to send out these slides to everyone after the presentation so you can reference them later. So if you're furiously taking notes, there is no need. I got you. And quickly, just remember that Title II covers state and local government, and Title I has more to do with anti-discrimination of disabled employees, because I always get asked in the question. So we'll go knock that out right away. Remember also that this is based on ANSI. This is the ANSI standard A117.1 standard, and that the standard protects persons well beyond those with an inability or with difficulty walking. Okay, sensory impairment, extremes of physical size, reaching, manipulation disabilities, those are just some of the other disabilities that this legislation helps to protect. And the goal of it all is really universal access and design. Okay. Now, I want to kick this off by talking about Section 36.403, which gives us a list of priorities when making alterations to provide accessibility in a facility. And you're going to notice that on this list, drinking fountains is on it. The entrance, accessible route, restrooms, telephones, fountains, parking, storage, alarms, all high priority items and basic human necessities when navigating the world. All people everywhere need water, and it's right at the tippy top of the list of things we need to survive, and we need to ensure that it's accessible to everyone as universally as possible as a basic human need. Now, Chapter 1, Section 102, just lets us know that this document contains both adult and children's anthropometric requirements, which is anthropometric, just a fancy word for measurements and capabilities of the human body. Children are defined as age 12 or younger in the ADA. Okay, it is assumed that if you are over the age of 12, that you are old enough to use whatever fountain is that you deem necessary, and so on. So you don't need an adult to assist you any longer. Now, Chapter 2 explains that where there is one fountain, which is typically a high side fountain, that there must be two fountains installed. Local building codes determine the number of drinking fountains that must be installed based on occupancy, right, per capita. This simply states that there must be a high side fountain and a low side fountain. What most people don't realize as well is that the low side fountain is not the only one that's designed for people with disabilities. The high side fountain is also a disabled, accessible fountain designed for those with bending and stooping disabilities. Okay, that may be using a walker, cane, crutches, and may not be physically able to utilize the low side fountain. Other than aesthetics, drinking fountains are not designed for able-bodied people. It's reasonable to assume that if you are able-bodied, that you can take a drink of whichever fountain it is that you choose. So if you are installing a single fountain in your facility or in a park, you must satisfy this requirement and install a second fountain. They don't even need to be next to each other. They can be separated, either end of a hallway, whatever, but they both must be present and easily accessible. The design of the facility itself is often not conducive to consolidating all of the equipment to one location, and sometimes needs to be separated due to a lack of space from the design. Now, 211.3 is referred to as the 50-50 rule. It's a really easy way to remember this, the 50-50 rule, and it simply states that half of the units installed shall be high fountains and the other half shall be low fountains. For example, if you are installing 10 brand new shiny Haws drinking fountains in a building, you couldn't do 6 high fountains and only 4 low fountains. Okay, you must provide 5 high and 5 low. The exception to this rule is where that number of fountains yields a fraction. Okay, and another example, given the previous requirement, we will assume that you have met the minimum number of drinking fountains for the property. Okay, and you have decided to add an additional drinking fountain to that number, giving you, say 11 total fountains. That 11th fountain can either be high or low. It's entirely up to you. It's beyond the number that you are required to put in the facility, so you can do whatever you want with it. So long as you have 3 high and 3 low to meet the 50-50 rule and the minimum number of fountains required, you can decide what to do with that last fountain, or the ones beyond that, if it is above and beyond the minimum. Now, in Chapter 3, we start getting into dimensional and mechanical elements, which is a term you're going to hear me use a few times. An element can be any of the devices that we are granting access to. This can be the drinking fountain, phone, fire extinguishers, alarms, baby changing tables. So many other items are on that list, but many of the measurements that we're about to cover apply to more than, again, just fountains. But fountains are our focus. So, with that in mind, this is one of the most important measurements to remember, and very frequently the section that's being violated in tear-outs and reinstalls and redesigns. 305.3 and 305.5 detail clear ground space to accommodate the wheelchair underneath the fountain, okay? Allowing an approach that is completely unobstructed to the fountain. You must provide a 30-inch by 48-inch space of clearance underneath the element, which is just larger than your typical adult-sized wheelchair, including your hands, right, operating the wheels. Now, giving the user clear floor space for the wheelchair and for their hands to maneuver that wheelchair into the space is incredibly important. And realize, too, that these are minimum requirements. Okay, you can provide more space, preferred. Here's an example that clearly demonstrates that that ground space in front of the element. In this case, a telephone and a fire extinguisher. 305.5 explains the positioning of this clear ground space, allowing for either a forward approach, like the one you see on the left, or a parallel approach, as you see on the right, both appropriate in different situations, and preferred also based on age. Children's um, accessible equipment is oftentimes, like if you think daycares or young school age and stuff like that, sometimes a parallel approach is much preferred, but we'll talk about that later. Remember that all these measurements are bare minimum requirements. The more space you can provide, the better. When the element is in an alcove, like in the examples above, wheelchair users are going to need additional space to maneuver, and the clear floor space changes based on both the depth of the alcove and the type of approach. So in our first example, our 30 by 48 inches becomes 36 by 48 inches when the depth of that alcove exceeds 2 feet, 24 inches. And in the second example, for a parallel approach, when the depth of the alcove exceeds 15 inches, and we go any deeper than that, then our clear floor space must be 30 by 60 inches. Okay, and if you consider the maneuver for a parallel approach, it just makes sense to provide more room, so you don't have to do like the old Starsky and Hutch turn and slide into the alcove. It's easy to approach. You can gently turn in and position yourself, and without any theatrics. Now, more and more states are requiring the use of alcoves, and it just makes sense for the element to be out of the path of travel. That way, you have a more private place to utilize whatever that equipment is. You're not impeding traffic in those areas, and those traversing that path aren't, interrupting you in what you're doing. Now, extending up from that clear floor space that we just covered, that we have defined, is our toe and knee clearance. So try to think of this clear area as a three-dimensional space, okay, extending up. Our toe clearance is 9 inches from the ground to the bottom of the element, and our knee clearance is 27 inches from the ground up to the bottom of the bowl or leading edge of whatever the object is. Okay, obstructions in this yellow highlighted area are another unfortunately common compliance issue. I've got some great examples coming up, and I'll show you what we've found out in the wild. The space underneath has to be absolutely clear, and that includes any space between the victim's knees too, right? So think like hanging phone books. Well, maybe that's a little dated. P-traps. P-traps are a no-no in that space, and things like that. So anything else that you can think of, that space is unusable. And that brings us to poll question number 2.
Alrighty. Getting into our second poll question of this webinar, how important is filtered water to you and or your clients? Extremely important, very important, somewhat important, not at all important, not sure. Again, we greatly appreciate you all submitting answers to this. Participation is greatly appreciated.
That's going to be an extremely important for me.
For me too. Awesome. Thank you all for voting. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll.
Awesome. Thanks again, everybody, for participating in those. Again, greatly appreciated. Now on to 307 regarding protruding objects. And we are going to use our seeing impaired, Tom Cruise-esque guy here on the right to example. Now, protruding objects are everywhere, and we have to be aware of how we install them and how we interact with them from an ADA perspective. Okay. and they're primarily in place in some terms to protect another type of protected class, which is that seeing impaired, visually impaired person. Now, elements may only protrude into a walkway so much and must be located at certain heights, whether they're in an alcove or not. This is to prevent anyone with a complete or partial loss of sight from running into those elements and obstructing their path. Now, objects with their leading edge or the lowest point on the front of the element above 27 inches may only protrude a maximum of 4 inches into the path of travel. Okay, but so long as that leading edge of the element is at or under 27 inches, then it is considered to be detectable by detection cane, according to the DOJ. Now, in this example, we've got our visually impaired buddy here navigating a hallway. On the bottom right, we see an object very similar in some ways to a drinking fountain. And so long as its leading edge is at or below that 27-inch line, it can be detected through the use of that detection cane and early enough to be avoided and to help prevent potential injury. This fountain and any element, so long as it's meeting the 27-inch requirement, can protrude any amount into the space. The same rule applies for elements at or above 80 inches from the floor. This is considered headroom clearance, and similar to the previous example, can extend any amount into the space. Although it's not frequently the case with a lot of things in the middle of a walkway, because we do have people that are taller than 80 inches, and we don't want them detecting those objects with their forehead. Now, on the left, we have an object sitting above 27 inches and below 80 inches, smack dab in the middle between those spaces, and therefore may not protrude into the space any more than 4 inches unless it's a handrail, which are allowed to protrude 4.5 inches as an included exception to this. Okay, now I'm going to use our 1011 HPS and our SK3 cane skirt for this next example. This is a dual high-low unit, and I want you to think like something that is typically in a high traffic, customer facing area. This one in particular because it's nice and shiny. But this will be a great example for what we are going to try to use to describe this next section for you, because what is most important here is that SK3 cane skirt. That's what we need to discuss here. Where drinking fountains cannot be alcoved out of the path of travel, a cane skirt must be used to lower the leading edge of the high side fountain to 27 inches to also make this side detectable. When you are using, and I want you to put yourself in the shoes of somebody doing this, but when you're using a detection cane, if you are unassisted, okay, you are generally following what is referred to as a shoreline, or oftentimes the outermost edge of a space. Okay, and since the visually impaired may need to detect something on either side of the room, they may be traveling in either direction, and without the cane skirt in place, there will likely be incidents where people will run into the high side fountain, or they'll have a difficult time finding or detecting it, because it's going to strike much higher, if at all, on the detection cane, which is why we use the cane skirt. Many states still don't fully utilize alcoves, and until they do, cane skirts are the answer to this issue. Now, Section 308 brings us to reach range requirements. Another important consideration when something like a bottle filler is installed, or when things like baby changing stations are put in place. The slide's pretty straightforward. If your reach is unobstructed, like in the photo on the left, then you have a 48-inch max, 15-inch minimum reach range. Okay, any buttons, handles, sensors, and so on must be located within this range. But as soon as we introduce an obstruction, right, our reach ranges are diminished. When an object shorter than 20 inches is in place, we keep our 48-inch high reach range, but our lower reach range disappears, right? Since we now have the fountain, or think a similar element in place. Now, when we reach over an object, that is 20 to 25 inches, our high reach range is shortened to only 44 inches, which makes sense, generally speaking. Drinking fountains are shorter than 20 inches, but if we're reaching further over an object, obviously our reach range is going to be diminished. Okay, and remember, we want to make things as easy as possible and not create a challenge for the user. So in design, specifically with bottle fillers, drinking fountains, etc., a lower option for whatever it is that you're activating is preferred. Even when we start speaking about like sensor operation, very typically lower on the unit, so that whatever device you're using, a bottle, etc., can be activated via that bottle, and then setting it on a bottle stand, perhaps underneath that 48 inches, again, as low as possible to make it as accessible as possible, right? We are not all built exactly the same. Some of us have shorter arms, some of us have longer arms, etc. We need to try to make it easy. Now, the DOJ, this DOJ advisory, this defines reach ranges for children based on age. Okay. Now remember, children are defined as ages 12 and under in the ADA. There are all these are all reach ranges that apply to both forward and parallel approach to an element. Okay, starting on the left, we have ages 3 and 4 with a high-low of 36 inches and 20 inches, 5 to 8, 40 and 18 inches, and then 9 to 12, 44 and 16 inches. Obviously, as they grow, their arm length grows and they are able to reach further down and higher up, making it easier, especially from a wheelchair, which I don't know if you've ever been confined to a wheelchair. I was quite the daredevil when I was younger, and I had to do a stint in a wheelchair, and it doesn't take a lot to make things much less accessible, trust me. Now, in Chapter 6, we get into specifics regarding plumbing elements and their measurements. Okay, first off, 602.2 covers clear floor space and the necessity to have the clear floor space centered on the unit, not on the alcove, not on the space. This is for a forward approach. As a parallel approach, it needs to be set up differently. Obviously, our toe and knee clearance must also still be available. There is an exception included here for parallel approaches for children's use units, allowing a parallel approach so long as the bubbler or spout is at a certain height and a certain depth. Okay, we'll look at that. And knee and toe clearance begins to, if you think about how it's installed, it begins to diminish pretty quickly as we lower fountains closer to the ground for children's use. So the use of a parallel approach is a very important option to have, especially when considering that children's use wheelchairs can vary wildly in size and can even be, depending on your budget and home, adult wheelchairs. Okay, so custom-sized wheelchairs can be sometimes expensive, and they can be pretty quickly outgrown. Although there are some options out there that kind of grow with you a bit. So a parallel approach can really help to solve this issue, so we're less concerned about the toe and knee clearance of the unit. Now here's a really good illustration of the floor space and how they are to be centered on the elements themselves. And as far as the fountain goes, since the clear floor space is intended for the wheelchair user, it's centered on the left low side fountain. Okay, and since there's no real floor space defined in black and white for the high side, the floor space can spill over under the high side fountain as much as is needed. Okay, many make the mistake of centering the clear floor space on the alcove, which leads to expensive tear-outs and redesigns and things of that sort, because we have that wall that creeps into our clear floor space if we make the mistake of centering it on the entire unit or on the alcove rather than just the low side fountain. Now here you can see we have a total width of 48 inches in this alcove, wall to wall. It isn't deeper than 24 inches, so we don't need to expand on our 30-inch clear floor space. You will notice that it shows a separate measurement for California. California has gone above and beyond the standard requirements and mandated an additional 2 inches of floor space, bumping up the width of our floor space to 32 inches. So that's 16 inches of space between the fountain from the center line of that fountain and the wall. With that in place, we are meeting our 32 inches of space for California, and in turn, we would meet our 15 inches of space or 30 inches of space for our standard installation. Now, remember also that the fountain does not need to be centered on the wall. It might look better that way, but for aesthetic purposes, it would look nice if you center it in the alcove, but that is not mandatory. That is not necessary. Okay. If we are running short on space, that high side fountain does not have a defined clear floor space. We have a generally agreed upon number of what it should be, and I'll talk about that and what that kind of looks like and what it should be. And I think if you think about who the customer is of that high side fountain, I think it'll make sense as to what that number is here in a moment. But we can easily offset the drinking fountains to the right to ensure that the left low side is we are meeting our clear floor space. That brings us to poll question number 3. Allie, if you would.
Alrighty, getting into our third poll question of the webinar. Would you be interested in learning more about the Haws hydration solutions? Option 1, interested in attending a product webinar. Option 2, scheduling a lunch and learn with us. Or 3, wants to obtain Haws hydration product literature. Again, thank you everyone for participating. We greatly appreciate it. We're getting quite a few votes in. I'll give you just a few more seconds to submit. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and close out this poll.
Ooh, someone snuck one in right there at the last second. All right, so I want to show you this. This is an excerpt from the California Building Code, and what they've done, along with Texas, who are best friends, and at some other states, is they, being powerhouses, huge influencers for the country, what they have done is made it mandatory to locate all drinking fountains in alcoves or within wing walls to ensure they don't impede into pedestrian walkways. And this is really important. These protected areas must be 32 inches wide and 18 inches deep minimum. Wing walls, if you're not aware, they kind of act like an alcove where an alcove can't be installed or has to be retrofitted into place, or that space is out in the open and we still need to create a barrier for the fountain. Now, the wing walls must also project horizontally, at least as far as the drinking fountain. And while we're on the topic, too, of Chapter 6, I should bring up that the flow of water must also be within compliance from the equipment on our end. We make ours adjustable from the front of the fountain, so it's really quite easy to accomplish. But the height of that stream of the water, if you can adjust it, it needs to be at least 4 inches tall to allow for a bottle or a glass to be filled for those who may not, who may be incapable of leaning over or bending or stooping to use the fountain. Okay, that's really important, and they can't take a drink. So they're going to use a bottle or a glass or whatever. It also makes it a lot easier for someone to use it in general, right? You don't have to put your mouth so close to the bubbler head. I don't know if you've ever seen Parks and Rec, but that's what I'm thinking is how Star-Lord decides to use drinking fountains, which is gross. Now, that brings us to some common ADA installation issues here that I want to show you. This, by now, after I've thrown all those numbers at you, should be pretty clear what the issue is. Okay. Now, the right-hand side fountains, fine. No issue there. The high side doesn't have a clear floor space available. The low side, plenty of clear floor space. Our toe and knee clearance is not obstructed. We're good to go. The left side is a problem child. We need to do a couple things here, okay, to fix, because we can fix this, right? The tile guy might not be happy, but we can get this back into compliance. Now, if we were to simply swap the two fountains, put the left low side in the center, basically the mirror opposite of what you see on the right side. That's what we want. We want to go high, low, low, high, and drop the bottle filler to the low side fountain. And we'll cover why that's important, but it's all has to do with reach ranges. Although the button on this one is really tall, so you're going to want to measure afterwards to make sure that's within our reach range limits, right? But that's how we would fix this, okay? Unfortunately, very common, but we need to drop that bottle filler to make it accessible. And if you're unaware, the bottle filler is always on the low side fountain, okay? No matter what, that's where that bottle filler needs to be. Now, if you want two bottle fillers, totally fine. You can add one on the high side, add one on the low side, but regardless, the bottle filler should always be on the low side fountain because that makes it more universally accessible to everybody. Okay. Now, next, speaking of not universally acceptable and accessible, that's tall. That's crazy. I could activate that with my forehead. That thing is so tall. And I get what they were trying to do, right? They wanted to be centered in the wall. They wanted to feed the supply line off of those fountains. But they went a little crazy. You know, the bottle filler probably should have been installed off to the left or right hand side on the wall to make it accessible to everybody. And only if we could still meet a clear floor space, right? Because the bottle filler will also require accessibility and clear floor space, toe and knee clearance, etc., and for that sensor to be within reach ranges. So, not great. Two more good ones here, which makes it even worse that the button it's that little dark gray circle on it is all the way at the tippy top of the unit, which is just wild. How tall off the ground this is. This is so high up. Very difficult to use, impossible to use from a wheelchair. Um, don't great examples of what not to do. Okay, and I want to show you one more example here. This is a nice cascading fountain design and good looking fountains too. But it's all wonky and backwards. Okay, they have clearly missed. That center fountain was intended to be the wheelchair accessible fountain, but remember our clear floor space is a three-dimensional space, and the child height fountain on the left-hand side is impeding our clear floor space and the three-dimensional toe and knee clearance extending up from that, and that will easily hit the arm rest on the wheelchair. Okay, this is difficult. They just did it. They just did it weird. So the fountain on the right hand side should be on the left hand side, and the high low should be on the right hand side. Okay, the child fountain can be right next to this. It just has to be spaced out to the left. It can't be perfectly distanced apart because it's going to again impede our our toe and knee clearance. So it needs to be slightly offset to allow for that. But that extended fountain that's all the way on the left should be in the center, extended out, easily accessible. And so this is fixable. But again, the tile guy is going to have to get out there and do some repairs. Oh, I lied. One more example. Outdoor, very important. I think all of you can see what is wrong here. That the wheelchair accessible fountain is way too close to that wall. Um, I don't even think you could pull off like a hybrid, you know, approach to this and get away with a drink. This needs to be pulled away from the wall. Preference for approach given to the wheelchair accessible fountain. All right, now over to children's use for just a minute. Okay, we're going to cover section 602.2, which gives us the maximum bowl height or bubbler height of 30 inches and a 3.5 inch maximum depth for the bubbler from the front edge of the fountain. This also allows us to forego our previously mentioned knee and toe clearance, since we can lower the fountain where the users are intended to be children. Okay. Now, there's not a lot of places like that, but I'll try to give you some examples here shortly. But daycares is a common example. There will need to be a parallel approach and a space for that available. Many states have their own requirements for children height and approach preference. So be sure to reference local requirements before you pull like a, well, Justin said so. But many states will allow for a parallel approach for children fountains and require a front approach, and some even specify their own knee clearance heights. Okay, although it's unusual, but there are a couple states out there. Now, with that said, let's move on to a few more examples. Now that everybody is confused, and I'm going to use our 1311 here and the 1501, very similar to that the second to last slide I showed you before, with the single fountain typically being the lowest drinking fountain for the child height, and then the high-low acting as your normal standing or bending and stooping and wheelchair accessible fountain. And I'll show you how that's set up. Now, model 1501, okay, that's what we have set up there with the model 1311, the child height. This installation could be a pretty wide alcove, or would need to be a very wide alcove indeed. But what we have here is what I tried to describe before. Okay, you can see that from the center line of the centered fountain, we have bumped the child height fountain over to the right. Okay, now if you've been in airports or schools or whatever, they just love this like cascading design from highest to lowest. Okay, and I agree, aesthetically it looks really, really good. There are, of course, other ways that you could do this. You could do low, high, low, or whatever, but this is generally the preference. But this is how you do it correctly. Okay, you are providing just enough space between that child fountain and the center line of the middle fountain to allow for wheelchair access. You don't even have to use the high-low that's attached. You could use 3 single fountains and throw them on the wall, spaced apart equally, 22 inches off center for the high and for the low. If you have a wide enough alcove or area for it, you'd be good to go. Now, just a couple, kind of hopping into outdoor fountains and compliance, just to talk about a couple of things. This is just another example here, and this fountain, for example, has an adjustable arm that can be adjusted for either adult or child height. These are incredibly common in, like, think public park areas, especially because of their ability to accommodate both ADA accessibility and for children, right? When installing these fountains, you need to pay special consideration to the approach and the direction of the bubbler head to ensure compliance. Okay. Now, I want to give you a few examples here, compliant examples, because we've seen the ugly stuff. Now, above, we have our 3150 installed. Okay, if the 3150 or any other outdoor drinking fountain is installed against a wall, building, railing structure, whatever it is, the center line of the wheelchair accessible fountain needs to be at a minimum of 15 inches from the wall to give us our 30 inches of clear ground space. And we'll, of course, need our 48 inches out from the base of the fountain to allow for easy access to the fountain. So, same as indoor installations, we have to have our available knee and toe clearance available underneath the fountain as well. Lastly, I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but on the bottom, in the middle, is our visual representation of the clear floor space for the high side fountain of 30 by 30 inches. Okay. Again, this is not required. This is not a black and white requirement in the standard, but it is a generally agreed upon space. Um, and is necessary for accessibility. And since it's intended for those with stooping or bending disabilities, then we need to assume that the devices such as walkers or others devices may be used, and that they need a certain amount of space available to access the bubbler and to not impede those devices. Okay. Now, common practice in public parks is to pour a pad of concrete, specifically for the fountain to help remove the fountain from the pedestrian walkway and give users a firm surface to stand on, or for the wheelchair users, a firm surface for the wheels to avoid difficulty that dirt or grass would provide access to. Okay, same thing goes for like if you had a historic building and you had shag carpet, that's a no-no for the ADA. Not easy to roll across. So then the same thing goes for sand and grass, etc. Right? You need a firm surface to traverse across. Now, in this example, you can clearly see the path of travel on the left side, which will provide easy access to the low side. And if the orientation of the fountain were any different in this exact layout, access to the fountain would be very difficult. Okay, to fit the fountain perfectly here, to include both the wheelchair-free ground space and the high side fountain space, we need a pad that is 69 by 52 inches deep and wide, respectively, with the low side again facing the path of travel for an easy forward approach. Okay, one more here, different example this time, but with wing walls or guardrails in place, all requirements remain the same for the approach, still favoring a forward approach since it's the easiest. Unfortunately, many installations prioritize the high side, and I like to think unintentionally, but we all know the urge to throw away the installation directions and the requirements for compliance are in the directions, so please don't do that. Remember that the guardrails need to extend at least far enough out so that no part of the fountain protrudes outside of the reach of the rails. Okay, this is all in an effort to make the unit more easily detectable and to keep it out of the path of travel. Okay, quick lineup just so you can see some examples of what type of stuff you are going to see out there, right? From an outdoor perspective, there may be multiple devices. There may be multiple, up to 3 uh, drinking fountains or bottle fillers and things of that nature. And we need to make sure that we are planning those pads and the installation and the approach appropriately for the type of device that is being installed. Okay. Now, for those who may not be aware, the 2010 ADA standards were derived from that A117.1 2009 standard. The updates that these standards last received included the addition of bottle filling stations to the drinking fountain section 602, as you see on the screen. Now, remember, this is in addition. Okay, a bottle filler does not replace a drinking fountain ever. And just so I really drive that home, a bottle filler does not replace a drinking fountain ever. Okay, we still have to have the drinking fountains. We have to have the drinking fountains. Maybe we prefer the bottle fillers. I know I hunt down bottle fillers like crazy. I've always got my bottle with me, whatever brand I'm dragging around, and I'll take it to the airport, I'll take it to the park, I'll take it to wherever. But I always have it with me. But we have to have that fountain. So unless you have exceeded your quota for the number of drinking fountains in your building and can then replace one or multiple of those drinking fountains with a bottle filler, right? But that's only if you're above and beyond the quota, the minimum number of fountains in your facility. Okay. Now 602.4 indicates that bottle fillers must adhere to 602.4.1 and point 2 because you have those memorized, right? You know what I'm talking about. Regarding clear floor space, which again is 30 by 48 inches, and that the controls, and this is really important, needs to be either hand operated or automatic and be within our reach ranges. Okay, and I'll go over all that in a moment here. But there's also an exception on this page stating that if the bottle filler is installed on both the high and low side fountains, then the high side does not need to comply with this section at all. which is due to the fact that our low side bottle filler is accessibly installed. So as long as we have that one installed, you can do whatever you want with the other one. You could make it at like professional basketball player height, and it doesn't matter because we have an accessible bottle filler. Now it's pretty rare to see, an installation with both sides uh, with a bottle filler, unless maybe it's like a really busy area, like an airport, train station, something like that. And with that in mind, if a bottle filler is not provided for both fountains, which is generally the case, then the one bottle filler has to be located on the low side fountain and to be accessible. Okay, and we say that last thing. The reason we say that automatic or hand operated is so that nobody gets weird with the installation operation of the controls, right? We can't add a knee or a foot pedal or something like that. That's not accessible, and that's not universally accessible. So they're just trying to avoid anything awkward from happening from an activation standpoint. Now, this is the new 1011 HSA.8 with a bottle filler over the low side fountain, well within reach ranges, and I want to use it as an example really quickly in accordance with 308.2.2 to show you that the bottle filler activator is located at 41 and 1/8 inches and below the 48 inches. This is exactly how you do it with the bottle filler. We're easily achieving knee clearance. The activator is well within that reach range, and we are completely compliant. Okay, but remember that this applies for many other types of devices. Okay. Another common installation model, the 1501. This one is mostly popular with schools due to that white enamel surface, which makes it stays cooler in direct sunlight, and it prevents kids from burning themselves on the hot stainless steel. Okay, and just to show you what that kind of looks like from a children's perspective, this is typically what you would find in a school, daycares, things like that. We can meet our reach clearances, the spout height, remember 30 inches, and a diminished knee clearance. Okay, just to give you a couple final compliance examples. And then this one's in our backyard. This is in the Reno Tahoe Airport. Just to leave it on a great note for what is an excellent installation and what it should look like. Poll question number 4, please.
Alrighty, getting into our fourth poll question. Would you be interested in having a Haws specification manager review and update your drinking fountain and bottle filler document? Yes or no?
His name's Hayden, by the way. He's awesome.
Great.
Unless you
Awesome.
really,
I'll give
maybe I'll do it.
everyone just a few more seconds. And thank you, everyone, for participating.
Why not put our guy to work? I promise you won't regret it. All right, now Revive. I kind of just mentioned it. I want to give you guys a quick little peek here into a brand new product, the next generation of bottle filler, public bottle filler that includes touchless bottle filler activation, programmable energy savings modes, LED electronic bottle filler displays, very fancy, very cool. And then a best in class that's, I don't know if you guys have commonly deal with sensor operated options, but they are often an issue. Easily defeatable, easily damaged. This is not that sensor. This is a very high level of vandal resistant sensor. It's not a beam of light that you're like breaking. It's called a time to destination sensor, and it is awesome. So you can scratch it up and stab it, and it'll keep on working, which is pretty cool. Includes 24-hour purge, smart field configurable filter or strainer. You don't have to worry about multiple models anymore. Like, am I ordering a filtered unit? Am I ordering a non-filtered unit? Doesn't matter anymore. This is field configurable. It comes with both. And then 16 gauge stainless steel, which is super heavy duty because kids are turds, and sometimes these are in non-supervised areas, and etc. And this thing is tough. You'd have to wake up with a very serious grudge against this drinking fountain to get anything done. Here's the full lineup. This is brand new. We just launched this at the beginning of the month. We're super proud of it. Our engineers worked very hard on it, and we wanted to share it with you. That's the full lineup there, from standalone bottle fillers to your single fountain or chilled, non-chilled, and high-low fountains. Lots of options coming, and we're very excited to share this with you. There's also there's kind of both the strainer and the filter there on the left-hand side. You can just swap them out, and if you prefer it to be a filtered unit later, you just pull the strainer out, pop in the filter. It's a smart filter and a smart strainer, so the unit will recognize which one is in there and act appropriately, which is just cool. It's also a 3,000 gallon filter, which is rad. And then a swivel bracket. How cool is that? Actually, our project name for this was DeLorean. If you think about like the doors on the cool car from Back to the Future, that's kind of what we were thinking for this. But that's why it swings out. We wanted it accessible, easy to get to. We could limit the footprint. So it's got this super cool swivel bracket for the filter, and it fits in your normal wall cavity. You don't need an extra deep wall cavity anymore. It fits in only 5.25 inch wall, which is rad. And the reason I'm sharing this is because we are going to have a product showcase event on August 28th at 10 a.m. that you are invited to. We're going to cover the product, key differentiators, some of the cutting edge new features and installation issues that we have fixed with this product. You can come and find out how Revive Series might help you to benefit you on your project. All attendees will be entered to win a Yeti cooler packed full of Haws swag too. The invitation will be in the follow-up email. So if you want to come hang out with us, we would greatly appreciate that, and we'll enter you to win, and you can learn a little bit about the new product. So we'd love to see you there. And then poll question number 5, and we'll close, and we'll all start answering questions and answers, and you can hang on as long as you want to hear those answers.
All right, last question for today. What is your role when it comes to drinking fountains? If no role, do not answer. We've got sell, specify, recommend, maintain, install, and purchase.
I like all the emojis rolling in. Lots of hand claps. I dig it. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. And just to again, more. Thank you all for participating in the poll questions today. We greatly appreciate all your responses and feedback. So thank you, everyone. And I'm going to go ahead and end this poll.
I love it. People found the emoji button. They're just rolling in. All right. Now, real quick, I've got these questions and answers, but I want to show you this slide because we're at the end of the hour, and I want you to have this information. And then I'm going to stay on. I'm going to answer questions and dig into it for a little bit longer, but just expect that follow-up email from us. You'll get all of these things that you see listed here, and then that Revive product showcase invite will be on that too. And we hope you come hang out with us and learn a little bit about the new Revive product. We're very excited and very proud of it, and hope you can join us. So there's the Haws customer service number, top-notch customer service, tech support that can't be beat. Very helpful. That's their contact information if you need anything from us. I would also highly recommend that you visit hawsco.com and sign up for our e-newsletter for information on upcoming webinars, CU accredited webinars. If you want to learn about eye washes and safety showers too, I do another version of this that touches on ANSI compliance for that. New product information. We also have a live chat function. If you prefer just to have a quick chat with the customer service team rather than making a phone call, all of that is available on www.hawsco.com. Our website is it's top notch. You'll love it. Now, with that out of the way, I want to say thank you for being here. Make sure you take everything that you've learned, go forth, be champions for compliance if you're getting out of here right now. Otherwise, I'm going to dig into the submitted questions, and then I have some that were sent to me on the side here. So the first one is, can I just install a bottle filler, or do I need to also install a drinking fountain? Also, how do I know how many are needed? The number of drinking fountains is determined by local plumbing code and the occupancy of your building. Okay, and they have a minimum number tied to that. How many drinking fountains you need based on what the occupancy is for universal access and ensuring that everybody has enough water. Okay, so if you think like a stadium, right? Tons of drinking fountains, tons of bottle fillers. But the drinking fountains are required, right? The bottle fillers are optional. But if you're going to install that bottle filler, it has to be compliant, okay? Just remember, have to have the drinking fountain. You want the bottle filler, you can get the bottle filler, okay? But again, they're going on every project now. Now, how long before bacteria starts to build up in the supply line, and what can I do to prevent it? The main thing, speaking of Revive, and many of our other products now, auto purge is a common function with Haws equipment. That's something that we have started to add regularly. What that does is automatically activate the equipment and purges the supply line to rid the line of potential Legionella or other bacteria that can grow in the line from stagnant water. Okay, if your fountain or your bottle filler is on like regular use, like it is constantly being activated, that's not an issue. The auto purge will still fire, but if you have a unit that is just sitting around with zero use, that's going to have to be cleaned out. Like think of a school, right? A school is closed for the summer. Maybe nobody's in there using the drinking fountains. Um, but that line should be cleared out pretty regularly, or when school opens back up. Preferably, they are, uh, descaling the lines or whatever they need to do before people come in to use it. All right. Otherwise, most of our new products include auto purge, and that's the way to go. Number three, I have a historic building. Is there a grandfather clause in the ADA? Nope. That one's easy. There's no grandfather clause. However, there is a a certain exception, okay, for historic buildings, um, and I'll try to include it, um, but wherever changes are reasonably made, and it's not, a lot of it comes down to cost. You can fight certain changes to historic buildings and stuff like that if it's going to be just a wild cost to update certain parts of the facility, then you may not have to. Although they prefer one accessible route, one accessible fountain, one accessible, part. They want you to have those pathways available into that building. Um, but it doesn't have to be the whole facility, right? There's only so much we want you to have to modify in a historic facility, and they'll make exceptions based on what those potential changes have to be. Okay, so there's no grandfather clause, but there are exceptions made for historic facilities. Now, does my water have to be filtered, or can it be? It's regular tap water. It can be regular tap water. That's fine. If you have good clean water in your facility or in your town, that's totally okay. Although most people prefer, you can tell based on the poll. I don't know if you guys can see the results, but that most people prefer filtered water now. Odor, lead, cysts. I hate saying that, but it filters 99.99% of cysts. Um, and so whatever is in the water can be easily removed, and you can get good, trustworthy, clean water out of most fountains and bottle fillers now. But look for something indicating that it is being filtered, right? But it can be just regular tap water if you have really good, clean tap water. Now, are sensors required in some facilities or situations, or can they be installed as a preference? They can be installed as a preference. Sensors aren't required anywhere, but they are the preference. They make activation so much easier, especially if you consider those with uh, you know missing limbs, prosthetics, things of that sort. It makes one-handed activation much more straightforward and less complicated, and more universally accessible. I think sensors they're the future. I think they should be on everything. And sensor technology has only improved. So I think that should be everywhere, but it is not required. Okay. Now I had a couple others submitted here, and they were very simple, very quick. The first one was more of a was advice, I think. Most bottle fillers observed in public areas are embedded in walls, lacking knee space. A solution to integrate knee space in hallways and public spots while ensuring safety is advisable. Please advise and thank you. It just felt like good advice. You were right on the nail. I mean, if the device is embedded in the wall, you're lacking knee and toe clearance. But if it is something simple like a baby changing table that folds out, right, that's not a problem. If it's a standalone bottle filler recessed into the wall, your reach range is still there, and that unit is still accessible. Recessed fire extinguisher, etc. Those are accessible. You need toe and knee clearance, but that toe and knee clearance is in front of the wall. You can easily reach what is on the wall. So that's not an issue. The next one was from Mr. Briscoe, Mr. Briscoe County Jr. You guys remember that show? That was a good one. Mr. Bruce Campbell. Braille sign language or Braille signage, sorry, was all it said. But that's usually supplemental signage added by whatever facility it is that is going in, and it's usually added after the fact. It very uncommonly comes on the equipment itself. So I think that's what your question was. Oh, and very important, this question was the registration did not ask for the AIA number for CEU credit. Can you confirm if you have this information or if this is a self-reporting? We're happy to report it for you. We just need look for those instructions in the follow-up email, and we're happy to take care of it for you and report that. So, Mr. Tidwell or Mrs. Tidwell. Now, if is there funding to retrofit existing fountains or install new? These are typically spec'd into projects, Connie. So very frequently new, but we've made them as easily retrofittable as possible. So if you do find funding, if you do decide you want to replace fountains or bottle fillers that are available in your facility, easily capable of doing so with the equipment that we have. So it depends on your needs, on what you find, but most common, they're specified into a facility, you know, and the architect, engineer will do that work, and then in a new facility, you'll have some bright, shiny new Haws equipment or another brand. And then on down the road, if you decide to retrofit, you're welcome to do so, right? And I hope you find that funding. It should be available, certainly since you're at the university. All right. With that, I think that's enough for now. I'm going to take the rest, and I'm going to make that document, fill it out, get it off to you guys. Remember to visit the website. Thank you for being here. And if you hung out with me, and a lot of you did, I greatly appreciate it. And thanks for doing so. We appreciate you being here. Thanks for your feedback on the polls. Visit www.hawsco.com, and we'll catch you later. Have a great week.